Nobody expected anything from him. He was the smallest, the youngest, the least significant. Shurima had princes before him, stronger princes, more visible ones who trained with weapons instead of reading books, ones who stood beside the emperor and looked like they belonged there. Azir did not look like he belonged anywhere important. He was slight, he was quiet, he spent his days in the library. And nobody thought that would ever matter. They were wrong, not just wrong, completely, historically, catastrophically wrong. His name was Azir, and the empire that dismissed him would one day bear his name forever. Subscribe if you are new. A new League of Legends story every week. This one starts with a boy. Nobody noticed. Shurima was the greatest empire of its age. There is no exaggeration in this. It was vast. It was powerful. Its armies were led by the Ascended, warriors who had undergone a divine transformation, who had been blessed by the power of the sun disk, who were, by any reasonable measure, closer to gods than to people. These warriors conquered. They expanded the empire's borders. They added territories and peoples and resources. Shurima kept growing. And at the center of all of it, the emperor. Ambitious, powerful, hungry for more. The kind of ruler who makes an empire great and who also makes it dangerous. Azir was one of his many sons. Far from the oldest. Far from the most impressive. He had so many brothers ahead of him in the line of succession that the idea of him ever becoming emperor was not even worth discussing. It was not cruelty, it was mathematics. Too many brothers. Too many ahead of him. Too little chance. The court knew this. The servants knew this. Even Azir's tutors knew this. They taught him with the energy of people educating someone who would not need most of Saravadacha. What they were learning. He would probably join the priesthood. Or govern some distant province where nothing important happened. That was the expectation. Azir had not been told about the expectation. Or he had been told and had not listened. Because he spent his days in the library. Not because he was forced to. Because he wanted to. Because the texts and scrolls and inscriptions held something that the training grounds did not. Understanding. History. Context. Meaning. Why things were the way they were. How they had come to be this way. What it all connected to. He loved this. He was genuinely, deeply, unfashionably devoted to it. The great scholar Nasus oversaw the libraries. Azir worked within those spaces. And in those spaces he met Xerath. A slave. Brought regularly to the library to retrieve texts on behalf of his master. Young. Quiet. Curious. The same restless intelligence that Azir recognized. The same hunger for understanding. In Shurima, slaves did not have names. This was the law. Azir broke the law. Not loudly. Not as a declaration. Privately. He gave the boy a name. Xerath. It meant, in the old tongue, one who shares. He made Xerath his personal slave. Not to use him. To protect him. To give him proximity to the library. To the books. To the life that Azir believed, even then, should belong to everyone who wanted it. They became inseparable. Two young people sharing an obsession. Poring over maps. Studying the histories. Tracing the patterns of the ascended warriors. The stories of impossible people doing impossible things. Azir dreamed of a Shurima that was more than what it was. Not the empire of conquest and expansion. Something else. Something more connected to what he read about in the oldest texts. A Shurima that built as much as it conquered. That valued understanding as much as force. That had room for people like Xerath. People of extraordinary ability who had been placed in impossible circumstances by the accident of their birth. He did not talk about this. Not yet. He was still a boy. Still invisible. Then came the night in the desert. Every year the imperial family made a journey. Through the territories. Across the lands Shurima controlled. A tradition. A demonstration. Power showing itself to the people who lived under it. The caravan stopped at a famous oasis. Azir and Xerath slipped away. Not for any dangerous reason. To look at the stars. To add to the sky maps they had been building from the library texts. Two boys lying on their backs in the desert sand. Drawing constellations. While the caravan slept. While assassins moved toward it. The attack was organized. Professional. Sent by enemies of the Empire. Aimed at the Emperor and his heirs. One of the assassins saw two shapes in the desert. Recognized one of them. Moved toward Azir, with a blade. Xerath did not think. He threw himself at the assassin. From behind. Without a weapon. Without a plan. Just his body between the blade and the boy, he called his friend. Azir found his dagger. He drove it into the assassin's throat. He grabbed the fallen man's sword. He ran toward the oasis. The attack was already over. Renekton, the ascended warrior who served as the Emperor's guard, had handled it. The bodies of the attackers were everywhere, and among the dead, Azir's brothers. All of them. Every heir who had stood between Azir and the throne. Gone in one night, Azir was now the heir. Not because he had done anything to earn it, because everyone ahead of him was dead. He told his father about Xerath, about the courage his friend had shown, about the moment when a slave had put himself between a blade and a prince. The Emperor did not care. He barely listened. A slave was a slave. What else was he supposed to do? Azir swore, in that moment, that Xerath would one day be considered his equal. His father had turned away. But the promise existed. The promise was real. The Emperor returned to the capital. Changed, broken in some way that grief and paranoia had made permanent. He believed the assassination had been arranged by people close to him. He began to suspect everyone. He acted on those suspicions. Shurima suffered for years. Executions, purges, campaigns of vengeance against people who may or may not have been Nisolo, Ipadla Joe, involved. The empire his father had built began to turn inward on itself. Azir was now 15, the heir to a paranoid ruler who despised him, who wished, openly, that the assassins had killed Azir and spared his brothers. The Empress was still young enough to bear children. If she produced a son, Azir's position would collapse. He was never entirely safe. He trained. This was new. Before the desert he had avoided the training grounds. Had chosen the library every time. After the desert he understood that choosing the library was no longer enough. He needed to be able to fight. Renekton took him as a student. The ascended warrior was not gentle, but he was thorough. Azir learned. Sword. Shield. Formation. The reading of a battle. How forces moved. How to anticipate the enemy's next move. How to command soldiers, rather than just lead them. He was not a natural warrior. He was a good student. And a good student, with the right teacher and a real reason to learn, can become something. How to command soldiers, unexpected. He had the reason. He had seen what happened when you could not defend yourself. He had seen the blade coming toward him in the desert. He had felt the specific helplessness of that moment. He did not intend to feel it again. He made Xerath his right hand, not as a servant, as an advisor. He gave him the task of knowing whatever needed to be known, of going wherever information could be found, of bringing back understanding, the same thing they had always done together. In the library, with the scrolls and the maps and the long evenings spent tracing patterns. Only now with actual stakes. Only now with the weight of an empire pressing down on both of them. Xerath rose to it. He always rose to it. This was who he was. This was who he had always been. Years passed. The Empress miscarried again and again. Each time Azir was slightly safer. Each time the court whispered about curses. Some of the whispers pointed at Azir. He dealt with these directly. He was not his father. He did not spiral into paranoia. But he did not permit open accusation. Those who accused him openly did not continue to do so. He was becoming something. Not just an heir, a leader. And then the night the Empress gave birth. A boy. Healthy. Shurima shook with a storm that night. Lightning, chaos, violence in the sky. By morning, the Empress and her newborn were dead. The Emperor too. The official story was grief. Suicide. But the fragments of what was found in the palace told a different story. Something had happened. Something enormous. Something that left bones and ash and no clear explanation. Azir stood in the wreckage of his family. The only one left. The empire needed a ruler. The empire had him. He was not what anyone had expected. He was not what anyone had planned for. But he was there. And unlike everyone who had dismissed him, he had been paying attention. For years. In the library. In the training grounds, after the desert. In the careful, daily work of becoming something more than what he had been assumed to be. He had read the histories. He knew what Shurima had been. The days when the empire stood for something more than expansion. When the Ascended served a higher purpose. When the sun disk blessed the land with meaning. He knew what Shurima could be again. And he had Xerath, the friend who had thrown himself at an assassin without hesitation. The advisor who knew whatever needed to be known. The person he had called his equal when no one else would. And he had a promise he intended to keep. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. Every week, a new League of Legends story. The ones nobody saw coming.